How are you, sir?
Good.
Seen you in a while?
Go easy with the camera.
Yeah.
I am the president of the Wilmington Environmental Restoration Committee, fondly called WERC. There are flyers on the table if you didn't get one earlier. Essentially, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization comprising mostly Wilmington residents, but also some folks in Woburn. Our membership is open to anyone who has a sincere interest in wanting to see the Olin site cleaned up. We don't have a dues schedule, but we certainly cheerfully accept donations anytime. And primarily time and attendance at meetings. Our main funding is the U.S. EPA through their Technical Assistance Grant Program. To date, we have been awarded $100,000, which helps us hire our technical experts, Cambridge Environmental, Inc. Cambridge is here tonight to demonstrate a mapping tool they've developed specifically for the Olin site and for work that compresses volumes and volumes of sampling data into a readily, well, sort of easier way of seeing the data and understanding. Cambridge has sent us their senior engineer, Dr. Steve Zemba, and one of their senior scientists, Dr. Edmund Crouch, and they'll be presenting their mapping tool over a few minutes. But first, I'd like to allow Jim DiLorenzo, the EPA project manager, a few minutes to just bring us up to date on what's going on at the site.
Thank you, Martha. My name is Jim DiLorenzo. I am the United States EPA Remedial Project Manager for the Olin Chemical Superfund site. Just a brief overview. So EPA New England manages sites for the 6 New England states, all of the Superfund sites. This is the most recent one added to the Superfund list. It was added in 2006. So these sites are very rare, few and far between to be adding to the list. And it's a testament to the true complexity and significant issues that are associated with this site. There truly are some very unique chemicals, and they've impacted, groundwater, soil, sediment, surface water. Many of you probably know there's a long history to this site. The facility operated from the 1950s until the mid-1980s. It was owned by a number of corporations, Olin Corporation being the most recent and current owner. They purchased the property in 1980. They ran the facility for 6 years and shut it down in 86. Began cleanup efforts as early as 89 in some areas of the site. So there's a very long history here. There's been a significant amount of data. I mean, these sites in general generate a lot of data. It's a very complex regulatory program, very thorough. Superfund's never been accused of moving too fast. It's a very big, slow program. But on the plus side, it's a very thorough program. We'll know more about this 50-acre property than any other property in Wilmington, I assure you, as well as the surrounding study area. And the study area really does encompass, so this is the Olin property in this area, and the study area, which is really defined by the extent of contamination in groundwater, extends all the way up and beyond the Maple Meadow Brook area, slightly beyond anyway in a few areas. So it's really quite a large study area. EPA began its study in earnest in 2009, and I would say we're about at the midway point through the study. There's been hundreds of soil samples, new soil samples collected, groundwater, surface water, and sediment samples. One of the important distinctions from what's been done in the past is under this program, it's really a broad look at the site. It's a look at all of the potential chemical compounds that have impacted the environment. In the past, there may have been a sample taken for chloride or ammonia. We're taking samples for over 200 individual chemical compounds. So every time a sample is collected, almost every time anyway, there are hundreds of chemicals that are analyzed in that sample. And that's important to really understand the true impacts that are going on here. So with that being said, at this point, we are midway through what I would call the study, what we call the remedial investigation. And the purpose really of that is to collect all the data, to collect a good defensible data set that we can then feed into a risk assessment and figure out what areas and what specific areas need to be addressed. And then from there, we'll start developing cleanup plans. When we propose cleanup plans, this process is pretty much informal until the point where EPA comes out to the community and says, we have a proposed remediation plan. Here's our proposed cleanup plan. At that point, the community is going to have an opportunity to make formal comment, and there'll be a formal hearing at that point. So that's where the process turns formal, because we want the community's input before selecting a final cleanup approach for this and other sites like it. Where work comes into play, they play a very important role because these sites are so complex. They take a lot of technical and scientific disciplines, geologists, hydrologists, chemists, risk assessors. EPA's grant program allows folks in your community to hire independent consultants to make sure that they understand the work being done by EPA, being done by, in this case, Olin Corporation as well. And it really is a voice for the community. And I must say, I've worked with EPA for 20 years. I'm very, very impressed with the work that work has done. They really have effectively engaged their consultant, Cambridge. They've effectively engaged EPA, and I think they'll be a good voice for the community moving forward. We also work closely with the town of Wilmington, the Board of Health, and their consultants, and Mass DEP. So there's a lot. I hate to make a federal case out of this, but it is. And there's a lot of, but the point, seriously, is there's a lot of people looking at this, trying to arrive on what the best cleanup decision is here. And there aren't any simple answers, there aren't any shortcuts. But we will get there. I've worked in this program for 20 years, we do get there. And the end result is usually one that the community is at least can accept and hopefully be happy with. The most significant contaminant that's been impacting and has been making maybe the newspaper every now and then is a compound known as N-nitrosodimethylamine, or NDMA. And, the importance of this compound is that it's extremely toxic in comparison to other chemicals. It's extremely mobile and moves faster in groundwater. So it has shown up in various private wells around town. It was the specific compound that took out the town of Wilmington's water supply in 2003 that operated in Maple Meadow Brook, what you may know as the Chestnut Street wells. So this chemical is the most significant chemical in groundwater. But again, there are hundreds of other chemicals. NDMA isn't a problem in soil, it's not a problem in sediment, but there are other chemicals there are, and we're looking at the full suite. So with that, I think I've said enough. I think, Martha, I'm going to turn it over to Cambridge and let them, this mapping tool is incredible. The importance of this is that it will allow anyone from their own laptop to look at data, all this complex data. They've uploaded it, we've given them the digitized data, they've been able to upload it, and they've turned that data into a very simple and easy to use Google Earth program that you can run from your desktop. And I think that may be of interest to some of you. So thank you.
Good evening, everybody. The nice thing about following Jim is he says everything I was going to say right before I say it, so I don't have anything else to say. But thanks for all coming out. It was really good to see a big crowd here. And I'm Steve Zenda at Edmund Crouch. I think we've already been introduced. We work for a company called Cambridge Environmental. I'm going to work with this little handout just to give you something to take home. If you haven't picked one up, it's sitting over on the table. We're a very, very small consulting company. We're looking at half of us in the Cambridge office right now, 2 others. So we work very closely with work over time. And I put together a little diagram in the bottom of that first page. It kind of shows this whole process. And at the bottom of it sits the Olin Superfund site. That's the contamination that's out there that something has to be done with. The responsibility for cleaning that up sits with Olin. They've taken that responsibility, and there are 4 consulting companies on this. The chart I wanted to emphasize. MapTech is the company you see on these maps. They're doing the bulk of the work, the data collection, and they're responsible. They work for Olin, but their work has to be approved by EPA. And EPA is in that dark box in the middle. They have the primary oversight at this site. And they have a company, Novus Engineering, that does a lot of work for them. We have the biggest box on here, but maybe the smallest amount of money. But it kind of speaks to the role that we can play. We're limited in some ways in what we do, both in the types of things we can do, but also in the amount of resources we have. I can tell you that the people in work put in tremendous, tremendous effort here. I mean, they really should be applauded at the end of this meeting. They've put in tons and tons of hours in time. But we work with them and try and help them out. I'll say how in a little bit. There's another group doing oversight here. It's the town itself. The town has a vested interest in the site getting cleaned up. So they have a consultant called Geo Insight that's also working on this project also. And Mass DEP, Joe pointed to back there. They also have a say because they have to approve the whole process too and make sure it's consistent with the state regulations. So that big box at the top is a lot of oversight and a lot of input that goes into the solution. And I encourage you to become part of it because the more people that start sending Jim DiLorenzo emails, the more he can actually make happen at this site, or work through work, so to speak. Next on the page, what we can and can't do for work and what we've done over time. One thing we can't do, and we'd love to do it, but we can't take new data. That's one of the main limitations of it. We can only look at data that other people have taken and interpret it. And so we can't collect data. The things that we do, we check reports. We're just another voice in overseeing. And seeing comments go into those reports so far, each of these oversight groups has a slightly different take on things. We all contribute something different. We look at different points. So Jim and EPA are getting a lot of good feedback from people, I think. You can test that, I hope. So we help also draft technical comments that would be sort of towards the things that we're trying to do, which is get the site cleaned up. But right now, get it assessed completely. This is a very important time in this whole process because this is when the main data set is collected. It's a very extensive data set, as Jim has determined, but we want to make sure it's extensive enough to get it all done right the first time. There's a lot of input right now going on to EPA. And our last bit is just communicating technical information. And that's basically what's going to happen tonight, because you're going to see a tool that's designed to basically, I was thinking of a slogan for this before, and I was thinking of John Howard and people. I'm coming up with data to the people, the whole idea behind this tonight. Make data more accessible to everybody. So, some of the things that we've thought about and helped work with so far are listed there. We want to make sure we get good data, but we're still concerned about some things. The groundwater system at this site is extremely complex. When those wells pump, town wells pump, when they turn those off, that changed things completely. And there are a lot of questions, legitimate questions right now about how contaminated certain parts of the aquifers are, and in particular, how contaminated the bedrock is. And I think we'll see in some of the data maps today, maybe there's not quite enough data in bedrock yet. We might need to take some more data to get some better definition of some chemicals. The main chemical that's out there, the main chemical mechanism, if you go through some of the reports, you'll see this thing called DAPL. It's an abbreviation for dense aqueous phase. Basically water that has a lot of salts and heavy stuff in it that makes it denser than regular water. Like salt water will float on, or salt water will sink in fresh water. This stuff sinks down into the aquifer. And the thought is that it pools a little bit on the bedrock, and there are these pools and these DAPL out there that's a continuing source of contamination. One of the things that's the focus of the investigation. There's also, as I pointed out, a containment area, a highly contaminated area right here underneath. This is a big plastic cover. There's a slurry wall there. One of the issues we're worried about is whether that slurry wall is perfectly doing a good job at keeping all the contamination within it. It makes it a lot easier for them to clean it up because they can say that's a containment area if it's working. But they haven't really proven beyond the shadow of a doubt yet that it's actually working. So that's one of the issues we're thinking about. A number of you here are probably worried about private wells, and they're sampling private wells and finding this chemical N-nitroso-ethylamine in private wells. And that's just sort of an extended contamination issue. How hard is it to suck it out there? And along with that, what is actually creating the N-nitroso-ethylamine? It's not a chemical that was used at all, but it's sort of, we call it chemical soup. It's produced by some of the other chemicals, it seems, that are out there in the environment and reacting with each other. And the way to be able to predict that is an important thing. Another issue is the calcium sulfate landfill. Maybe I can get DEP and EPA fighting about this because it's a jurisdictional issue here. The calcium sulfate landfill is mostly calcium sulfate. It's right down here, right next to the Woburn landfill. And it mostly contains the chemical calcium sulfate, which isn't very toxic, but it also contains a lot of trace levels of all the other chemicals that all used. And if we look at some of the groundwater wells tonight, which you'll see there's some contamination there that you probably need to be worried about, at least make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Andrew Crouch because one of the main things that we kept hearing when we first got involved with work in 2008, I think it was that you can't ever find the data. The data on all of the projects that Olin was working on, and reports that were put in big reports, they were inaccessible to people completely. We worked very, very hard through comments and through EPA, basically to get the databases out there in the first place. So once we had the database out there, we decided, well, let's try to make this available to people in form that they can use it and see data. So at the end of this, we want you to all go home, download this, put it into Google Earth, try it out. So I'll let him take over and do some discussion.
Okay, thank you. What you're looking at is Google Earth. I don't know how many people have got Google Earth already on their machines. One or two. Yeah, that's quite a few of them. It's a wonderful program. You can get it for free. It works on Linux and on Windows, and probably on other types. There's probably a version for Mac. Is there a version for Mac? Probably. So it's easy to get hold of, it's free, it's wonderful to use. And so what we've done is made the groundwater data accessible in Google Earth. Trying to understand data is something we've been doing for years. And it's always difficult on a site like this, where you have reams and reams of data on hundreds of chemicals and you're trying to interpret it. The best interpreter of many of these data sets is the human eye. The human eye is very good at integrating things together. So if you can get things on maps, it's very useful. And what we have here is a tool that gets the data on a map, basically in the same way that is available on the maps in the data books that we've got already available. But you can do it for every chemical instead of just selected chemicals, and you can make your own choices in some cases for what you put on the map. So I'm going to quickly go through the tool we've got here and give you a bit of instruction on it. You can download this material from the website that is listed on the third page, I guess, of this. Top of the third page of this on the groundwater contamination maps. This is the site where you can download what I'm just going to show you, the things that go into Google Earth to allow you to see these, and with some instructions as to what you're seeing and how to use it on this website. So there's a page of instructions here and 3 links for the 3 data sets that I'm going to show you. This is Google Earth, as I say. You can put your own data into this. The way you do that is you click on the File menu and open And what you're going to open is one of the KMZ files that you download off our website. The .kmz file there. This is the first round, the Olin Site Spring 2010 groundwater data. Open that and wait a few moments while it digests it, and it will come up in your temporary places over here. I've set it up so that it just comes up as a single line there. You can then expand this to show a large number of entries for the spring 2010 groundwater data. First in the list here is all well names. If you click on the little box there, it will show you all well names and where they are. So you can zoom in and see where each well is. So if you've got data anywhere, you can find the well name and where it is relative to everything else. Now they generally get in the way, so I'm going to turn them off. And we've got the spring of 2010. We actually have two other data sets, so let's import those at the same time. You can open as much as you like on this. You just need enough memory. So I'm going to open all three of them. This is the round 2 data set. Wait a few moments for it to digest it again. Here it is, round 2. And then the most recent one that we've got is the May 2011 set. Digest those as well. And here we are. And I'm going to expand all three of them. So we've got access to all of them at once. It's a long way down. So we've got the well names here. That's actually present in all 3 rounds because there is sampling different wells possibly in different rounds. We also have all the chemicals here. Now this is actually not all the chemicals that were sampled. I've left out the chemicals which had no observed contamination and also were below the site action limit, the project action limit. So they're of no interest because they're not there, basically, so far as we can tell, to a level of any interest on the site. So what's left are all the chemicals that either have been detected or are non-detect, but the detection limit wasn't low enough to go below the project action limit, so that you can't be sure that they're not there at levels that you're interested in. So you can see that there's a lot of them. I haven't counted them, but there's quite a few, as you can see, all the way down to zinc from 111 to tetrachloroethane there. If we choose one of these chemicals, let's choose nitrosodimethylamine, since that's an interesting one. N-nitrosodimethylamine is this one. We can expand that, and we have 3 sets of entries. We've got shallow, deep, and bedrock. This is for the different depth ranges of the wells that were sampled, so that we can look at different layers, as it were, down through the soil, through the groundwater. These are not very well defined depth ranges, but they're what has been used by Olin's consultants. I should mention also that any bedrock well is also considered a deep well, so sometimes you get the same thing twice on the maps that I'm going to show you. But if we look at just the shallow wells, for example, like N-nitrosodimethylamine, this is we're still looking at round 1 of the spring 2010 sampling round. This is all the measurements of N-nitrosodimethylamine in shallow groundwater wells in that round of sampling. And you can see where each well is, and the symbol gives you some information about it. Crosses indicate non-detects. circles indicate detect. And the size of the circle, the area of the circle, is proportional to the concentration that was measured. The bigger it is, the more important it is, the higher the concentration. The non-detect are all coloured on this one, or most of them are coloured yellow. I chose yellow, arbitrary choice. That indicates that they're a non-detect, but they're above the project action limit. So that they're non-detect, but there could still be nitromethylamine there at a level that is of interest. So even though it was non-detect, it may still nevertheless be, you can't dismiss it immediately. Some of these also have little pink edges. If you look at that one, if I zoom in on that one, you can see, well, it doesn't get any bigger, but it has a pink edge. The pink edge is an indicator that during the examination of these data, somebody made a decision to change the status of that particular measurement. The lab called it one thing. In the final determination, it was called something else. So the lab may have said this was a non-detect, or sorry, the lab may have said this was a detect, but a chemist may have looked at it subsequently and decided, no, it isn't. There's good reasons for this, but they're just being flagged here with pink edges. Anything with a pink edge has a change of status at some point in the examination of the data. These data go through quality control, and chemists looked at them to make sure that everything was done according to the rule book, essentially, and there's good reasons for the rule book, so that there's good reasons that the status has changed generally. So we have non-detects and measurements, and you can get further information by clicking on each one. So you click on that, it will tell you the information about it. It tells you what the name of the well is and the chemicals that we're looking at. It says that it's a no-detect. This one is a non-detect. That's the ND. It also tells you what the lowest detection limit was for this one, and that, in this case, is 2 × 10⁻³ micrograms per litre. It also tells you that the maximum detection on the site was 16 micrograms per litre, and it tells you also that the project action limit for this chemical is 4.2 × 10⁻⁴ micrograms per litre. And here we have some information that's given in the database that we have on this file. The lab said that the concentration was 2 nanograms per litre, that's 2 × 10⁻³ micrograms per litre, but it recorded that as U as undetect, so that 2 is actually the detection limit, or actually the reporting limit, but it was a non-detect, it was below 2. And the final concentration after the quality control checks was also said to be 2 non-detect. And that's the unit of the 2. And this is the validation level. The technical people gave various validation levels to their quality control. You'd have to go look in the documentation to find out what that all means. It's just available here in case anybody needs it. And the same can be done for any way. Look, that one, for example, that is 0.78 micrograms per litre, 7.8 × 10⁻⁻⁴ micrograms per litre. Measured as, the lab said it was 780 nanograms per litre, which is the same thing as 0.78 micrograms per litre. The lab didn't give it any qualifier. After quality control, it was given a J qualifier, which means that it's really below the method, below the level at which the method is very accurate. So the accuracy of this is somewhat less than it could be if it had been a higher concentration. So that gives you an example of surface, shallow groundwater, we can turn that off and look at the deep groundwater, and there's the maximum on the maximum measured on the site in this round of sampling. Is that big spot there. They don't get any bigger than that. I didn't look any bigger than that because it interfered. And in fact, there's multiple measurements there. I clicked on it and it's separated into multiple things. That's indicating that there's multiple measurements there, probably multiple wells. Let's look at that one. That is GW62BR for bedrock. So that's a bedrock well. If I click on one of the other ones, that's GW62BRD, that's another bedrock well, but with a D suffix means it was at a different depth, I assume. I'd have to go look myself at the technical details to find that out for certain. And then there are actually another couple of small ones there if you look. Just click on one of those. That's the GW62M, that's above the bedrock, but it's still deep. And then the fourth one there is GW62D, another depth range. And all of them got detects, but at different levels. That's why the circles are different sizes. So you see you can go and dig in and see what all the measurements were at that point in this round and get the information on each one of them just by clicking on it. Overall, you've got the visual aspect of it that tells you. You can see where the contamination is and where the major hit is and stuff like that. And if we look at the bedrock alone, you can see that there's very few measurements in bedrock. We've got this big one here, biggie here, where we've got two samples in bedrock at different depths, I assume. Well, we've got one up here and we've got one over here. There we go. Click on them. That's GW103 in bedrock. And that's at 0.037 micrograms per litre. 3.7 by 10⁻², or 37 nanograms per litre. And the same is true for any other chemical. You can select any other chemical and look at it. And if you want to, you can select all of them at once and get all levels at once. And you might get multiple things at the site. You get something like that. Because I've got bedrock and deep twice here, the same things twice in that case. But in other cases, you've got multiple measurements at one site, at one location, which may be different things. Shallow and deep and bedrock could be three different things. And sometimes you have to click on it just to see what's going on. That one you can see there's a yellow and a yellow with a pink tinge, which is not quite so clear. You can get them overlaying one another. So to be sure what's there, you've got to go and click on it. And sometimes, if you zoom in, you can sometimes see that they separate a bit, so that they're actually slightly different places, as you see there. Those two wells are slightly apart. That one is GW73S. It may still be 73, but that's GW73D. They drilled them a little bit apart. Well, they either drilled them a little bit apart or they put the coordinates in slightly different. It's not quite clear in some cases unless you go out there and look, I guess. So that's that round. And then if you want to, you can turn that off and go and look at the next round of data. Round 2 in 2010. I look at the same thing again. N-nitrosodimethylamine. So many of these, it takes some time to find them. There we go. And there we are. There's more samples. Looks like more samples, doesn't it? There. If you look in bedrock only, we've only got a few wells in bedrock again. Zoomed out a long way. But again, you can see that the NDMA is being measured in bedrock here. And in the deep wells, you can see a sort of, possibly a plume shape. Is our eyes integrating the data together and possibly showing us a clue. Just be aware that our eyes are very powerful pattern matchers. They can see patterns. The trouble is they often see patterns when there aren't any patterns. So just be aware of that. You sometimes see things that really aren't there. But this does look like a plume just here in the deep wells and possibly connecting up with these over here. And you can see that in the deep wells in the bedrock for NDMA, for example, we haven't got any ring of non-detect out here, so we don't know how far out really it goes in the bedrock here, for example, or even in the deep wells, because there's no nice crosses out here showing there's nothing out here. And the same may be true in other directions as well, although it looks like here we've got crosses out here, which suggests maybe we've got far enough out there. I've got deep in bedrock showing there. If we just look at bedrock, we've got too few wells to say about bedrock, because there's the last one in bedrock and there's no bedrock well out there to tell us anything. And the shallow wells, that's the shallow wells. And again, we can show all of them if we like, just by clicking. So, what chemicals are of interest? Well, you can look at the ones that have been said to be of interest. Let's see, ammonia is possibly of interest. Well, ammonia is an interesting thing. You've got to know what to look for in your chemical list. Unfortunately, in this chemical list, ammonia is listed under nitrogen. It should be ammonia as nitrogen, but they, for some reason in the database, they put it as nitrogen as ammonia. But this is nitrogen, for example, and this is the second round of sampling. If we look at the shallow wells, for example, you can see there's ammonia in the shallow wells, mostly in this area, but you can see a scattering up here. You then go to the deep wells. Again, you've got what looks maybe like a plume going out in this direction. And these are non-detects. These are things with the status change. The lab said it was 0.18 with no qualifier, and when the QA, or the quality control people got at it, it was changed to a non-detect at 0.18, at a level of 0.18. So that's just something to be wary of. That's all the ones out here seem to be being qualified at some point in between the lab and final evaluation. So although we've got non-detects out here, the non-detect level is all above the project action limit, and they've all, the status has been changed on all of them, so you've got to be a little bit wary, I would think, out there. The bedrock for nitrogen, for ammonia, we got very few sample points again, but there doesn't seem to be anything out here at the moment. There's a couple of detects here. In this round, if we like, we could look at ammonia in all three rounds simultaneously, at all depths, or all depth ranges. I'm just giving you examples of what you can do with this. So that's all the wells that have ever been sampled, or at least in these three rounds of sampling, have been sampled for ammonia with the levels given. And just be aware that when you do three together, when you do more than one sampling round together, the biggest circles don't necessarily correspond, because I've set it up so that the biggest circles correspond to the maximum concentration found within a given round. So that may be the maximum for one round at a concentration of 23, and that may be the maximum for another round, perhaps, with a maximum of 3.7 by 10 to the 6 microgram per litre, whereas that one was, what was it? That was 2.3 times 10 to the minus 6. So 10 to the 6. 2,300 milligrams per litre. So if you do multiple levels together, you can be misled by the sizes of the circles. And again, you have to be careful with things like that, because it's actually multiple things at once. And you've got to go and select each one individually to find out information on each one individually. So that's, for example, where the ammonia is, or where the ammonia has been measured at least. The same can be done for the other chemicals of interest.
David,
Yeah?
can I interrupt for a second? I just wanted to catch you on this one. Can you have ammonia up here for a second?
Yeah.
I just want to catch everybody. I'm Gary Mercer, I'm part of work, and we spend a lot of time looking at this stuff. One of our reasons is trying to get out to everybody is there's just so much data to look at it. As you see, we've sat through, we've looked at 2 parameters at all these different depths. So there's only a limited number of us, and we know many of you have an interest in this site. So what we're trying to do is give you a tool both to show you what's going on, but also if you've got an interest, whether you live nearby it, or you've got some interest in it, you can look at it and sort of help us understand what's going on. Now, some of this is fairly technical stuff we're going through, but I want to make sure that people have a chance to try to see what are we doing this whole thing for. But part of the issues we have, lots of numbers, most of you are familiar with the site. The general plume runs in this direction. I mean, if you look at the big numbers, everything we look at, whether it's NDMA, ammonia, all the other fluids we have out there. But as Edmund pointed out, we haven't necessarily bounded the problem. So that's our biggest concern right now is we don't know how far out some of these things go. And we're hitting texts over here that we were surprised at. So we're very concerned on how it is. And we have a real boundary problem to the south over here. We don't have wells out far enough. So after we took this first round of wells, we found out we're hitting the text in sort of our outer ring of wells. And that means we've got to go beyond it. So we're trying to find out how far the problem went. So a lot of this is trying to make sure that as we try to understand this, and as Jim mentioned, these take a long time to do, and we all get impatient for it, but we want to make sure that we know how far the problem went out there. We aren't going to be surprised 5 or 10 years down the road when we found some other problem over here that was really part of this site. So part of the problem is that this problem is bigger than what we thought it was. And also the pollutants, we've talked about NDMA, which is very high and shut down the wells. And it's extremely high down in these deeper pools in here, down in the bedrock. So that's a big problem. It's got very high pools in there. But it's not staying still. It's moving out. So we're very concerned how far it's moved out. The wells were shut off in 2003, 2004 timeframe. Shutting off the wells rearranged the groundwater down here. Historically, if you look at these things, it makes sense. Was, hey, we were pumping a lot of water in this direction. Did some of this pumping from the town wells sort of go in this direction? Plus the streams there, so the water's going to go in that direction. These wells aren't pumping anymore. We're concerned now the water's heading south. So this is a complex site, so things changed out there, and we're still struggling trying to figure out what's going on with this. So we're not coming to you with any answers. We're starting to see the magnitude of the problem, but we're still trying to bound the problem in terms of how far it's got out there. And the other thing is, there's lots of chemicals here that, honestly, I can't pronounce half of them. I have somebody who can pronounce most of them for me. And most of you have no idea what these are, except they're probably not good. And that's mostly the case out there. They're not good to be in there. There are some things like ammonia that you may be familiar with. But again, some of these ammonia concentrations, Evan, can you show some of the ammonia concentrations?
Well, yeah, these ones, for example, that one is 3,700 milligrams per litre, 3.7 grams per litre.
Yeah, in
It's
general,
a lot of ammonia.
yeah, in general backgrounds, in streams, finding ammonia like 0.2 is fine. We're dealing with 3,000. So we have extremely high levels of some of these things. Now, in general, that's down deep in the groundwater, and no one's drinking that specific point. It's not harming anyone right now at that location. But as the site spreads out, as some of this gets into the streams, that's the problem. So you'll find low numbers in some spots out on the edges, but some places we have it's where you almost have a product out there that you could use as ammonia. It's extremely high strength.
Because that is right on the site, that
That's on the
particular
site.
one, but this one is right out here, presumably where there's a possible pool, and that one's at 2,300, which is almost as high.
So we're looking at the groundwater here, because that's what's spreading out. We also have the soils on the site here. We have a whole other database of the soils themselves and how contaminated the soils are on the site. So there's another list of all these chemicals and how bad the soils are on the site. And you gotta clean up the soils, because if we don't clean up the soils, that's just gonna leach out and get into the ground. Also, we have data about the sediment in the stream out there, so we have a lot of data. This is just trying to get your hands on some of it. We've talked about 2 of the chemicals. What's another?
Well, Gary, there's a question over here.
Sure.
I just want to know whether you've collaborated with the study that's ongoing at Industrialplex in Wilmington, because they have a lot of data on ammonia as one of the cleanup constituents in Hallsbrook.
Yeah.
I mean, there's tons more data that you could put on, at least about ammonia.
Yes, down on that side, I mean, we're sort of upstream of them, but you're right, down below here, there's a lot of ammonia problems and a lot of other problems down there. These 2 sites back up to each other. And our site sort of, I was expecting.
Well, I know the 2 will be just like Wells G&H and in the Industrialplex, as EPA keeps going out with their study area and going out and out, they combine the sites.
Well, the regulatory side, I don't know, but I do know that we have a south ditch, a stream that goes down there, and it's fairly contaminated, so we're heading right into their territory.
Yeah, they were worried at Industrialplex that this might be the background coming in. So, with your time, I don't think you combine these sites, because this is just such a...
Oh, I know, I just know you can share data.
But they could, but I think that's been some of our biggest complaints over time, is that it's really hard to get at these data. So, now you're...
The challenge we have in this, we ask EPS to have told, and it only gets someone to do it, so we have to keep doing the mother may I to get them to do anything. If they say no, we say please, make you do it. So it's not always easy doing this thing for those guys.
Now, you only mentioned data from 2010, 2011. What about all the historic data that's been going on since 2003?
We spent a long time, like 2007, 2008, going through all the historic data. Some of it we're using as sort of past and understanding history, but some of it there's no quality control with it. And though it's of interest, we can't really use it to prove out what's going on here. I don't think we want to use it's nice to know what happened in 1992, but that's different than what's out there now. So it gives us a perspective of what's changed out there. That's fine.
We don't have all that data electronically either, do we?
No, some of that will be forthcoming, that will be used in this Superfund study. So some of the historic data will eventually get uploaded into the software program, but right now it's just limited to the 2009, 2010 Superfund data collected to date. Minus the private wells. There's no private well data in there because we want to respect people's privacy.
Yes. As many of you know, right now our outer boundary, many of these things are private wells which are getting mixed up. So that's got us a whole concern. What's benzoic acid?
What's that?
Benzoic acid?
I just put this up to show you some more symbols. This is an example of a chemical that's detected in various places, but all the detects are below the project action limit, and so are essentially of very little interest.
Except they might be markers for the chemicals coming up rolling, even though it might not harm you, they still might be
They
doing
make markers, right? And this symbol here indicates cases where the quality control considers that this is an invalid measurement. So it's something that we should, it was sampled, but it hasn't given you any information, essentially.
You have data that you don't really have data.
Well, yeah, they took data, but got nothing out.
Our ability to detect some of these, our ability to detect them, we create chemicals, we can't detect them at low levels, though they're not safe at those low levels, so.
Well, these ones, the project action limit is supposedly some sort of safe level, it says.
We're trying to get down there.
So these are detects below that level. And similarly, these non-detects are also with a detection level and reporting limit below the project action.
So Edmund,
Yes.
could you choose one of the wells, maybe even, I don't know how many people in the room are from more of the Chestnut Street area, the private well sampling area, but choose one of the the wells and do your starburst thing, a lot of people aren't gonna know what chemicals they should be looking for. So just show them that you can just pick a well and have it sort of show you all the sample data, and then you can pick out the red.
If you want to check everything, you can put everything at once. So for example, in the spring 2010, that's everything all at once. I'm going to turn the well names off, so we've just got the chemicals. Now if you want to know, if you're out here somewhere and you want to see what was in that well, well, you can see a heck of a lot of things were measured.
That's all the pollutants.
That's all the pollutants, but there's not very much there. There's a couple of.
That's scary.
Well, it's just
Most of those are non-detectable.
any measurement. Here's one that was detected. What was that? That was arsenic. Arsenic in groundwater.
Arsenic tends to be high in serious
Well, yeah.
generally high.
Arsenic is one of those that is interesting in a different sense. And let's put arsenic up. Slow down for some reason.
Are the arsenic levels high at the Industriplex and Wells GNH sites?
Some,
Some.
Yes.
arsenic and chromium.
Well, we have, maybe chromium may be another one we'll look at.
Let's put all the else
Tanning process.
Arsenic is,
They used to make arsenics of lead at the Merrimack Chemical Company, right
Yeah.
here where the landfill is.
Arsenic's a tough one because it is a regional problem. If you look at that pattern, it doesn't look much different than some of the old chemicals. So
I know, whether there's high.
At those levels, that's
Right.
really.
But it could be, it's not due to Olin, but Olin's making it happen by getting it out of the rock. The other chemicals.
It may be coming from the rock, but being leached out by the plume of other salts.
Could you look at chromium?
Yeah.
Chromium's a metal that also is very high in the site. And some forms of chromium are very toxic, so that's another one. We have numerous chemicals that are of interest at different levels. Yeah. Hexagon is chrome 6, which is the toxic form.
You can see that even with this tool, it takes a little bit of time to get set up what you want to see. And undoubtedly it could be made fancier, but you need a little bit of time. This is chromium. This is hexavalent.
Chrome, and you see it's more on site, and we're concerned if you had cell phones, it's more down here than you see up that direction. So that's one of the ones that we think are heading more south than north.
Although in this particular case, everything's green, so it's below the project action, the project action.
Yeah, but it's still so Chrome is one of those. This one too?
Yeah, the DEHP is, or BEHP is Gary's favorite. It's DEHP, it's under bis ethyl hexyl phthalate.
Phthalates. Phthalates are a group of chemicals. This is one of the nastier ones out there. We're finding a lot of those out there. We're trying to expand and look at more of those out there. Some of the issues out there, we're finding things here that, despite our data, we still don't know all the human impact of those chemicals. So we're trying to find out, are we getting more out there? It's a sad state where we tend to produce chemicals faster than we actually know if they're safe. So this one is not, this is a carcinogen. And most of these
But
are.
no, it's not a carcinogen, it's a reproductive toxin.
Reproductive toxin. So you hurt your kids, not yourself. This is another one we found fairly high. You see many of the green ones, which is lower excellent, where we have tested
The highest level body calcium sulfate.
landfill, which you mentioned earlier.
Right.
The calcium sulfate landfill is that part of the site? It's a closed landfill? but it's not exactly, it still has some of the site's contamination in it. So we have to understand what's going on there. This is also big. So there's some high levels of that. And that's very high in the soils too on the site too.
So it would be really interesting for the folks who are here from Woburn to compare some of your data right south of this information to what is appearing in those wells.
We have a few wells south, but you see we don't have a lot south. But we do know that our boundary, we're hitting some very high concentrations of stuff
In particular in the surface water.
in the surface water. And we're also, I think, reported with Cook Avenue having some hits here, and we're also concerned how much of it's now south, flowing south. Is that, if you think about it, this used to flow more this direction, the groundwater, and if I was to change it back around, the groundwater wells up, we may be pushing more south out there. So that's one of our concerns.
So that's the tool we've given you. Now, go and have fun with it. And see what you think.
So can we just ask if anyone in the group has any particular substances, any chemicals you're worried about, or a particular area around the site that you want them to show you?
One of my questions is, as far as north, one of those, how close is that to Chestnut?
Chestnut's, Butler's over here, Chestnut's over here. So that's, we don't have wells, yeah, Chestnut's here. Butler's Rose over there. We don't have wells out there quite yet, but as I mentioned earlier, we're concerned that we know there are some private wells that NDMA hits out there. So one of our issues is we need to get some of these sites out a little farther.
Are those the walls that are along the land cap, along the wood line and behind?
I haven't actually been to those wells.
But some of those do have bedrock monitoring wells, and presumably if, for the private wells around there where NDMA is showing up in bedrock wells, the artesian wells, whatever, then it's coming from the bedrock down here. So if you go around that edge, you can look at those, the ones that have BR, which are bedrock, and they'll have shallow bedrock and deep bedrock, and see what's in those wells, and that's likely what's on its way to your well.
And I live in that, and I have a deep well, and how do I go about getting my well tested? Is that something you guys would do, test a well?
Something you should talk to Jim about.
One thing I mentioned bedrock. Sort of a long time Olin had this thing, below this sandy soils, there's bedrock down there. There's always this belief that the depth of this heavier water. When Olin discharged, it went deep, and this bedrock is a rough little surface, but it used to sit on the top of that surface. We're very suspicious now, and I think we're pretty much convinced that that rock's not this nice concrete rock or rock. It's got cracks in it, fractures in it, and this stuff went down into those fractures. So it's down into this fractures, all the cracks are in this rock deep, so it's down into the bedrock well. So it's does not, many of these are served into the soils, but once this material's down into the bedrock, it can go a lot of different places. And we're concerned that some of the private wells that are down in bedrock are hitting those same fractures that have this stuff in it and pulling it to them. So that's another thing that we're trying to get a handle on, and get a much better understanding of what exactly bedrock is.
Yeah, just to help folks understand, put things in context a little bit. So what Edmund and Cambridge has been showing you are monitoring or test wells, and there are about 130 or 140 of them now. And those test wells, so each one was put in by Olin Corporation, some as long ago as the 1980s, some as recent as last summer. They're on Olin's property. They extend down to just about the city line. We have one into the city of Woburn over in this area. We have one down by Great Ave, and then the majority of them are in this area, up and around Maple Meadow Brook. So most are close to the property itself. There are more in this area, and then the furthest points out were around Maple Meadow Brook. There aren't any that go out as far as Chestnut or Butters Row, not yet, but there are a number of private wells in those areas, and those are also test points. And so far, we have sampled about, I believe it's 10 or 11 private wells along Chestnut, Hillside, Mill Road, and have found out of those wells, most have been non-detect for the NDMA. We have found NDMA on Hillside, I think is the furthest point away from the property so far. And there are other private wells that we will be working to test, eventually all the private wells out there, because they're good sampling points at the very least, but we also want to make sure that this chemical isn't starting to show up in more private wells. But anyway, all the data you see on here are the test wells, none of the private wells, because again, we want to kind of keep those folks' information out of the public purview.
This
Sure,
shows
one
that,
question for you. The well that's on Breed Avenue is tested positive. Okay. Is there any plans to bring more wells south, moving them past Breed Avenue, going toward, say, North Maple Street or even on Main Street where 1071 is?
Good question. Mike, in case you didn't ask, Mike's talking about one of the test wells or monitoring wells is on Reed Avenue, which is right in this area here. It represents one of the furthest south sampling points or test wells that have been installed so far. And it's actually an older well. It was put in the 90s. In the most recent round, it tested positive for a very low concentration of NDMA. The importance, though, is that it was non-detect before that most recent sample result. So Mike's question is, now are we going to step out further? And the short answer is yes. It's kind of a twofold process. The first thing EPA is doing is we sent surveys to all to retest this well, of course, to see was this a stray detection that doesn't show up again, or is it the start of, as Gary was saying, maybe we're seeing a shift in the groundwater patterns. Groundwater generally moves very slow. It's not like when you turn on your faucet and you see the water run. Groundwater moves several feet a year maybe, so it moves very slow. The town wells were shut off in 2000, latter part of 2002, early 2003. So it makes sense that now, several years later, we may start to see those wells were essentially sucking all the groundwater in at 25 million gallons per day. And now we'll probably start to see the effects of that suction stopping and stuff kind of reaching out. What we don't know is how far will it reach out? Will it, do the concentrations we see represent the highest we will see? I just don't know. And then again, NDMA is one of the more mobile ones. It moves faster in groundwater. And that's why it's not surprising to see that one show up first. Will some of the heavier chemicals eventually make it that far out? We don't know. There's still a lot of questions. This is, moving us in the right direction to get answers, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, any? Jim?
Go ahead.
I thought I read earlier that at one time the plume, if you want to call it that, was migrating north, and now it seems to be migrating south. Seems to be between Breed Ave and Ames Street, there's a whole area that's just not tested. What's the plan to put test wells in the area? Just above your hand, what's your hand on it? If it's migrating down, would it make sense to put some wells in to see where it starts to show up?
Good question. Well, just let me clarify first of all. The municipal wells were in this area. There were 5 of them. Absent those wells, an actual flow of groundwater was in 2 directions. There's somewhat of what we call a groundwater divide. It cuts right across the Olin property. Everything sort of north, and this is not, black and white, but generally speaking, everything north and west of that line flows off towards the Ipswich River watershed, and everything south and east of that line flows off down towards the Adjona. Because these wells were pumping at a high volume, the municipal wells, it was stressing the aquifer and probably pulling things over, which when you pull up a lot of these figures that Edmund's created, you'll see kind of this bullseye, this plume, if you will. Now that that's stopped, it's starting to spread out in all three, all directions. So it's not just starting to move south, it's starting to finger out. And so we're concerned about the entire perimeter, and there's a focus on the entire perimeter. When you move down the south, there are, I feel fairly comfortable with the number of test wells in this area. There's, 8 or 9 private wells off of Cook Ave and Burnham that are being tested quarterly. There are monitoring wells on Jewel Drive, which are right here. There are 2 right in the cul-de-sac. So basically each one of these crosses. I know it looks like a big void here, but that's because, historically, until recently, these were all non-detects, and all these wells in Cook Ave are non-detect. Now that they're detects, now that we have a detect here, you're right, it's starting to make us look at where's that boundary. But not only here, Frank, but all around, we have the same concern. So there are more wells that are going to be needed now, and that's being evaluated now.
How deep are those test wells, if you start migrating south of the wells, how deep could it go?
Well, it's hard to say. How deep is, the groundwater is 3-dimensional. You have your shallow sand aquifer. Most of the contamination here, because of the heavy salts, as Gary mentioned, are sitting on top of that bedrock plane. But the bedrock itself is highly fractured. A lot of these private wells, almost every single one in fact, are anywhere from 300 to 700 feet below the ground surface. So, once it gets in the bedrock, it's really hard to track it. But there are techniques, geophysical techniques and other scientific things that are going on to try to figure that out. But the test wells have to go in all depths, is the short answer. We need to look at more wells in the sand aquifer. We definitely need more wells in the bedrock. Olwen's, belief when EPA inherited this site was that the contamination hadn't and wouldn't get into the bedrock. We know that's not true. The data shows it's in the bedrock. Out of the 130 or so monitoring wells out there, there are less than, I think, 12 that are screened in bedrock. That's why these private wells have become, they're important first and foremost for public health. But secondly, they're important to EPA because they're helping to provide more data in the bedrock because there aren't a lot of test wells out there. Very expensive to put in bedrock wells, so there are very few of them.
Has any consideration been given to operating the wells and treating the water to control the migration?
Not yet, but that is likely one of the options that will be looked at for part of the cleanup strategy once we're done with data collection, is to either, and again, I'll have to work closely with DEP and the town and work on this, but there will likely be options to turn back on the municipal wells, either for hydraulic containment to start to pull the stuff back in, or possibly to treat and use the water distribution system again down the road. So those are both options.
Seems like all the data is showing that this thing is in a constant state of flux, it's very dynamic. Now, the pollution stopped in '86, and we've been studying it for 25 years. At what point is it more effective to start doing something about it? We're going to study it for another 25? Everything we knew last year isn't true anymore because it keeps moving around.
Right. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. The site, was first, studied by Olwen itself, and it was studied under DEP until 2006, and now it's been studied by EPA since then. There's no simple answer other than, we now have this process. We have to follow the Superfund requirements now, but a less bureaucratic answer is that a lot of that historic data, like Gary said, just isn't usable anymore because the conditions do change. But more than that, a lot of those samples just did not look for a lot of these important chemicals that feed into potential exposure, that feed into the problem. There are hundreds of samples for chlorine and ammonia those things aren't that toxic. I mean, they tell us something about the nature and extent of contamination, but they don't tell us about the true exposure. So this is really, I know it's hard to believe given that there's 25 years of historic sampling here. It's really the first time we're getting a look at a lot of these chemicals.
Yeah, but that's not my point. My point is that a lot of the stuff we know right now today isn't going to matter in 10 years if we haven't done anything about it.
Right.
It's going to be old data too. It's not that significant.
I
Because
stop.
the stuff's going
Yeah.
to move.
Well, yeah, I was just going to thank you, George. Yeah, I mean, so we are starting to move in the direction. I mean, it's inevitable that this is going to have a cleanup. It's not a situation where you can just say, okay, let's go out and clean it up yet. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. One of the steps to move in that direction, and I didn't really get into the, explaining the extent of contamination out here, but again, to reiterate what was said, a lot of the heaviest, most contaminated areas, the areas where you see these big red dots, are sitting right on top of bedrock. This stuff called DAPL, dense aqueous phase liquid, is the most contaminated groundwater. It has a density that makes it very, very slow moving, very dense material. One of the first steps towards a comprehensive cleanup is to figure out how you can get that stuff out of the ground. You can't just pump it like regular groundwater. It's too heavy. It's got
Sir.
It's like a slurry. Yeah.
Sir, may I interrupt you?
Yeah.
I think what the gentleman is saying, do you have a mechanical way to clean up this mess? You don't?
Not yet.
Okay. Is anybody working on a mechanical way to clean it up?
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
a test well's going in right now. The construction
Is
is
there a
underway.
point in time when you're gonna stop? And
Yes.
like you said, it's 25 years.
I know. I hear what you're saying. I know.
Yeah.
I don't have a certain date
Is
certain.
there money for a mechanical cleanup?
Yeah, one of the important aspects here is that Olin and the other parties that cause this problem are
They
paying for
paid
it.
out of
They're paying for this. They're paying.
millions, right?
Yep, this study right now is costing several $1 million. The current one.
I understand
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
there's over 200 different chemicals. Is there a mechanical way to clean up the 200?
That's what we need to figure out. I don't have a definitive answer yet. I mean, I mean, this stuff, you can't pump it like regular groundwater. If you pump it too fast, you're gonna cause the problem to get worse. And so, the very next step in figuring that out is to take this dense conglomerate of chemicals, and they're putting a test well on Jewel Drive. It's gonna start pulling this material out. It's under construction now. EPA's been pushing for it for years. It's finally, construction has broke ground. That test well's going in the ground right in this area, and that's going to determine how quickly you can pull this out, what the best method is to get it out of the ground. And we need to know that because you need to know how far away you can space the full-scale cleanup wells. You have to know, once you get it out of the ground, can you treat it? Is the technology there to treat this stuff to make it safe? Once you get it out of the ground, it has to go somewhere.
Well, you know the chemical, then do you know how to treat it, how to take it? It's like if you're on a naval ship and there's water in the oil, you have a system where you take the water out from the oil.
Right.
They know how to do that. Do you know how to take a chemical out of the water?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, the issue is that it's not just,
There's a machine that will do it.
there's going to have to be a whole series of different treatment technologies.
It'll purify.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to separate, we're going to have to,
Yeah, separate.
you can't just run it through a filter, it needs,
Right.
UV oxidation.
We
So
understand.
yeah, no, it's moving in that direction. I ask for your patience, it's going to get there. It's just, there's no quick way to get there, but we're moving in that direction. The test well's going in, it'll be operating this spring. And so that's the first step to getting there. But, this problem unfortunately took decades to create. And like anything, it's if you drop a little bit of oil in a swimming pool, it's very easy to drop that oil in there. Now you have to clean up the whole pool. And that's, you know, a very simplistic situation, or, you know, an example of what's going on here. It's just no easy, quick way to get this stuff out of the ground. But there is a way to get to it, and we'll figure it out.
Jim, yeah, you had a question.
What are the plans, if any, to retest the perimeter wells, private wells? For instance, those that showed up non-detect, we know that there's some that did have it in that area.
Right,
in Chestnut Street area, Hillside Way, Mill Road, and that type of thing.
Okay.
What are the plans to continue to retest those wells?
Right now, we're waiting to figure that out. I mean, they're going to be retested. I don't have a concrete proposal yet. Right now, there are 12 drinking water wells in that area of town. We got all in the sample 7 of them last summer. Fortunately, all 7 came up non-detect. There are 3 that they're already continuing to sample quarterly in that area. 2 of those 3 have had the NDMA.
Right. So why wouldn't you continue to test those others to make sure that it's not moving, since you don't know how fast it's moving?
We are. I just don't have a concrete date yet on that. But my next priority is to try to get to the other 5 or 6 that haven't been sampled yet, and then to get back to all of them again. And it will be resampled. I just don't have a date for it yet. But definitely, I mean, those are test points that are important to us. Yeah.
Jim, I think it's important to mention that it's likely that all of it won't be cleaned up, that it's all based on risk assessment and preventing people's exposure to it. So, you know, like Industriplex in Woburn, a lot of the chemicals are still there in the ground. They are just capped, and they call them institutional controls. They prevent anybody from digging there. They prevent anybody from sucking water out of there. So there's quite a likelihood that the whole thing won't be sucked out of the ground and gone. It'll be cornered off and say, okay, nobody can dig here, nobody can put wells here, and put institutional controls that say nobody will be exposed to it. So that is sometimes the cleanup technology isn't that they're going to drill 7,000 wells and pull gallons off of each piece of bedrock. It'll be, all right, nobody can do anything in this area. It's off limits. You know, so that is a certain element of the cleanup technologies that they leave it there and prevent you from being exposed to it.
Yes, that's true, I understand that, but as he shows us on this map, it's flowing out, it's flowing into other wells, so there has to be a way to contain it.
Well,
and like he says, are these wells sucking it back in? Well, what's next? How do we clean it up? It certainly can be cleaned up.
Well, usually they take those big red dots, those are the hot spots.
Yeah.
They take all of them, eliminate all the hard ones, and say, you know, I mean, some cleanup technologies for DEP, they call it monitored natural attenuation. You know, that Mother Nature, you know, that they eliminated the source, and that slowly but surely, you know, it'll break down. So, but, you know, that is it. You know.
Let me just make a couple of distinctions here that I think are important. You raise a very good point, and I appreciate it. This groundwater, this site will never be pristine again. It's just technically impossible. Technically impossible. I can say that with confidence. But it is technically possible to get rid of the worst contamination. It is technically possible to return this drinking water system to the town of Wilmington. And that's, you know, my goal, that's EPA's goal. These DAPL areas, these dense aqueous phase liquid, and I hate to use terms like that, just think of the worst groundwater areas. It's dense groundwater. It's an ongoing source for the bigger problem. So we have to get to, the bigger problem is this. But those areas are, we believe, limited to, you know, here, 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 and maybe somewhere in here. Those are the areas that this step to get that stuff out of the ground, we're going to get that out of the ground as far as we can. We're going to push over to do that. Because those are sources.
Those are the sources.
And you get rid of those, and yeah, no, groundwater's never gonna be pristine again, but the goal will be to try to get it clean enough to use again. But that's an important distinction. It'll never, it's too compromised, the environment's too compromised, we can never clean it.
You mentioned a couple of times that you have to push all of them and sort of coerce them and convince. Seems to me that EPA has a statutory mandate and statutory authority to do whatever they want at this site, as long as it's within the guidelines of the statute. I don't get this negotiation business. It seems to me that sometimes the tail wagging the dog, and I don't think EPA is in a position to not have that happen.
Right. I think, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, the way that the Superfund law is written, it's written that the polluter pays for the problem. The way that that has been legislated, if you will, is that Olin does the work. They collect all the samples. It's their consultants. EPA takes on an oversight role in a case like that. Now, if Olin went bankrupt, the federal government would have to step in and take on that role. It's not like we're going, you're hearing, I think you're getting this here. I mean, we're not going to Olin and say, please do this. We're going to Olin and say, do this, or we're going to take some type of regulatory enforcement action. But what you don't want to have happen is get to a point where you wind up in court rather than in the field cleaning it up. And so it is a balance act. The good news is that Olin is paying for this. They are viable. National Poly, whoever they were, the company that operated it before Olin and American Built Right, all three of them are paying for this. And they will pay for the cleanup. But they also have a say. I mean, they're not going to pay for it and not have a say. And the Superfund law gives them that say. They're one voice of many. So it is a trade-off, but at least all of us as taxpayers aren't paying for this right now.
I just assume see them go to Chapter 7 before going to the general fund, but if that's the way it's got to go, so be it.
Right. That's a fair question.
I would just add to that, Jim. I know when the Superfund law first took effect, a large percentage of the money was being spent on courtroom costs, and not a lot of sites were getting cleaned up. So I think there's more of a push to try to at least work with potential responsible parties without letting them off the hook. But instead of just sitting there battling in court while nothing gets done, at least you get you start to get towards the cleanup.
Right. But, rest assured, the line is not blurred. I mean,
Right.
EPA will enforce the statute. We will push to get this cleaned up. And I can say the word push because they're not going to come merrily along. That's the reality of it. But we do have the law on our side.
But in terms of commenting about this cooperative effort, that makes a lot of sense, but I have to also say that but for the intervention of EPA and a few well-placed political authorities, Olin would turn around, close the doors, bugged out of town, and left this crap for all the people to just deal with who couldn't kill us. And that's just a fact. As a matter of fact, a lot of the obscure data, we talk about the old obscure data, it's all self-serving. They do their own testing, so it's fine. And I think the only time reliable data is really going to be coming up has been since EPA's had oversight, and we've had a peer review of the work that's been done, because otherwise you would have been asking the fox to guard the hen house, and that's the way it was.
Right.
And we all recall the early days of this process where Olin was doing everything possibly could to get sign-offs, write-offs, and let's just close this deal, and have a nice day, we'll see you later. Maybe we should turn around and this is a bit sarcastic, but positive plan where we pump the water out and ship it down to Tennessee and store it on their site. And I wonder how upset they do that. And even have a rail spur they want to use, so I think that might make some sense. Sorry, I just got it.
On that note, Frank, I think we need to wrap up. I'd like to thank Jim, Joe, obviously Edmund and Steve, and also a little shout out to Mr. Garner at WCTV for videotaping tonight. He's one of our faithful followers, so thank you, Dick. We have some refreshments in the back. I know some of you might want to talk to Steve and Edmund and maybe get a little hand holding on how you can download. If you have any questions on their printout, and just chat them up. Maybe they could show you a well of interest for a couple minutes. And also, I know a couple of you might want to talk to Jim. I would ask our work members to sort of come back over in the back corner here for a quick little business meeting. Maybe get a cookie or a pretzel or something on your way and we'll do a little business. Thank you all for coming tonight. If you have questions, take a worksheet. It has our contact information on it, and also Jim.
I just wanted to make sure, this tool that they have come up with, again, it allows any one of you to look at this data, so that we're very transparent here, and I would really encourage folks to go to the website and download it if you have any, interest at all beyond what was presented tonight. And if you have a question on any of the data, call Martha, call myself, we'd be glad to
I won't have answers, but I can point you in the right direction.
She knows my cell phone.
Thank you.